The sharp snap of a wine glass being set on porcelain echoed in my ears, louder than the dozen voices talking around me. Laughter, gossip, clinks. I sat on the furthest chair at the end of the reunion banquet table, the one no one wanted to claim I wasn't supposed to be here. I'd only come because Grandpa had asked, and now I regretted it. "She's just a waitress," my brother Neil said loud enough for the entire table to hear. His voice was filled with that smug, tight-lipped arrogance I remembered too well. "Why does she even need a seat with us?" Someone snickered, I didn't know who. Maybe it was Aunt Miranda. Or maybe it was that third cousin I hadn't seen in 8 years, who wore pearls like she was drowning in them. I didn't look up. I focused on the salad in front of me untouched. I'd worn the nicest thing I owned. A soft cream blouse, my one good pair of jeans, and a pair of polished flats. But it didn't matter. Nothing I wore, said, or did could make me acceptable in their eyes. I worked at a downtown diner, poured coffee for lawyers in the morning, and cleaned ketchup off booths at night. But that wasn't a shameful part to them. The shame, according to my mother's cold glances, was that I'd chosen not to do better, not to marry up, not to chase some fancy degree, or take a loan to fake a life I didn't want. I was happy being grounded, real, but real doesn't impress people who live in curated perfection. I forced a smile and tried to cut my chicken. My hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the weight of every sneer, every eye roll every time someone shifted their chair a few inches farther from mine. "Why are you even here, Claire?" Neil's fiancée asked, her voice sickly sweet. "Aren't you always too busy, working night shifts to come to these family things?" I looked up at her blonde, glowy, dressed in designer chiffon. I recognised her. She'd come into the diner once, left a $1 tip on a $48 bill. I said nothing back then. I came because Grandpa invited me, I said calmly. My voice didn't shake, but I could feel my jaw tightening. I wasn't going to come. My mother sighed and pretended to fix the play settings. "You shouldn't have. This is a family celebration." "I am family," I said, my voice softer now, almost childlike. "Barely," Neil muttered, leaning back. "You're like the mascot, someone we all tolerate for comic relief." My ears burned. I blinked hard, refusing to let them see the glassiness forming. I wouldn't give them that. Then, just as I was about to excuse myself and leave, I heard it. The distant sound of tires crunching against gravel. Then, silence. Then, a collective gasp. Chairs scraped heads, turned to the buzz of conversation, halted like someone had hit mute. A black Rolls-Royce Phantom slowly rolled into view through the tall glass doors of the venue. My brother's fiancé clutched his arm. Whose car is that? The driver's door opened, and a sharply dressed man stepped out 6 feet 2 inches tall, wearing a tan and a dark blue suit that looked custom-made to fit a body sculpted by purpose. Not vanity. The kind of man people turned to look at, not because he demanded attention, but because he owned it. He walked towards the hall, and he was smiling. "Claire," he said when he reached the entrance. His voice was smooth, deep, and warm. His eyes scanned the table until they landed on me. And in that moment, the room may as well have disappeared. Everyone stared. "Claire," my mum whispered. The man stepped forward, his tone effortlessly confident. "Sorry, I'm late, baby. Traffic was worse than I expected." And then he did the unthinkable. He leaned down and kissed my hand. Tender, respectful, intimate, familiar. The room froze. Who is he?" someone stammered. I stood up slowly, locking eyes with Neil. "He's my husband," I said softly. Gasps rippled like waves through the room. But what none of them saw coming, what none of them could have imagined, was why I'd kept him a secret all this time. The silence in the banquet hall stretched so long it felt like time had stopped. No one moved. No one even breathed. Neil's fiancée blinked at me like her brain had blue screened. My mother's jaw tensed so tightly I thought it might snap off. Aunt Miranda nearly dropped her wine glass. Meanwhile, I stood there still in my simple blouse and jeans, holding hands with a man who looked like he'd stepped straight out of Forbes. My husband turned to the room and smiled politely, but his eyes never left me. "Claire," he said gently, "do you want to stay here, or should we head out?" I took a deep breath. "I think I'm done here," I said quietly. I picked up my purse. For the first time that evening, I walked tall. My spine straightened. My steps didn't falter. The shame that had hung over me like fog was gone. But just as we turned toward the exit, my grandfather stood up. "Wait," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife through silk. Everyone turned, even I froze. Grandpa slowly walked around the table, ignoring the stares. "You all will know who this man is?" he asked. "You want to know how Claire the waitress has a husband who makes more in a day than most of you see in a year?" I wanted to stop him. I didn't want this to turn into a scene, but he wasn't done. I knew, Grandpa said, "I've known all along." He placed a hand on my shoulder. Gently, "Claire didn't tell anyone because she didn't want the attention. She didn't want your fake smiles or your forced respect. She wanted love, not approval." Murmurs broke out like firecrackers around the room. "She married for kindness," he added. "Not for money. She married someone who sees her heart, something most of you haven't even tried to see." I saw my father shift uncomfortably. My mother's mouth pressed into a hard line, but Neil looked pale. "This is insane," he mumbled. "She's lying. She has to be." My husband stepped forward, calm, controlled, unapologetic. "I'm Ethan Hart," he said, every head turned. Now there was recognition. The name had landed like a thunderclap. Hart, Enterprises real estate tech, luxury development. The man was a billionaire and not the spoiled handed-down kind. He'd built it quietly, privately. Ethan looked directly at Neil. "Claire saved my life." "What?" Neil scoffed. "I was having a panic attack," Ethan said, voice steady. "It was late. I was alone, corner booth, at that diner she worked at. Everyone else ignored me. She didn't. She sat with me. She stayed until I could breathe again." He turned back to me, his voice gentler now. "And she didn't recognize me. She didn't care who I was. She just cared that I was okay." My heart clenched. I hadn't expected him to share that here. That moment had always been just ours. Ethan continued. "I knew that night she was different. A woman who listens when no one else does, who sees people." He turned to the room now, full of wide eyes and pin-drop silence. "So, yeah, she's a waitress. And she's also the kindest, smartest, strongest person I've ever met." I couldn't hold it in any longer. My eyes welled up. Not because I was hurt, but because for the first time in my life I was being seen the way I'd always wanted to be. Without labels, without shame. Just as me. My mother stepped forward then, her voice shaking. "Claire, why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her with no malice, just a calm honesty, because it shouldn't have taken a billionaire walking through those doors for you to treat me like I mattered. She flinched just barely. "I never stopped being your daughter," I whispered, "even when you acted like I was an embarrassment." I turned to leave again. This time, no one stopped me, not even Grandpa, because they all knew there was nothing left to say. But what came next in my life with Ethan was far more complicated than any of them could imagine. The door of the banquet hall clicked shut behind us, but I could still feel their eyes on my back. I didn't look back. Not once, Ethan guided me to the car silently. His hand was warm around mine, steady like always, the moment the door closed and the soft hum of the engine replaced the whispers and stares. I exhaled. It was the first real breath I'd taken all night. He glanced at me. "You okay?" I nodded, swallowing back the lump in my throat. "Yeah, I didn't expect you to come." He smirked, eyes softening. "I told you I wouldn't let you face them alone." I looked out the window as the trees zipped by. You always show up when I least expect it." He reached for my hand again, and always when it matters. For the next few minutes we drove in silence, the kind that doesn't feel awkward, just full of unspoken things, memories, emotions, and a strange, bittersweet peace. My phone buzzed 6 missed calls, 14 texts, all from my mum, Neil, and a few others, whose numbers I hadn't saved. I turned the screen off. I didn't need to read the messages. I already knew the tone. Sudden regret, sudden curiosity, sudden desperation. People always remember your worth when they realize someone valuable already saw it. We arrived at the townhouse Ethan had bought months ago. Quiet street, old brick charm, tucked into the city but far from the noise. He parked the car and looked at me carefully. "You don't owe them anything, Claire." I know I whispered, but part of me still wants them to. "I don't know," apologised, admit they were wrong. He leaned closer. "You're human. It's okay to want that, but don't need it to heal." His words landed deep because I had been waiting for years for anyone in my family to just say they saw me, that they were proud, that I was enough. But all I'd gotten was silence or shame. Inside, I slipped out of my shoes and curled up on the couch. Ethan poured tea the way he always did when he knew I needed grounding. "Tell me something," he said as he handed me the mug. "If today didn't happen, if that car never pulled up and they never knew who I was, would have changed how you see yourself." I paused. "The truth?" "No," I said. "But it still hurts that I had to prove I'm not nothing before they finally paused long enough to blink." He nodded his jaw tight. "They didn't make you who you are." "You did," I smiled faintly. "That's not entirely true. They taught me what I didn't want to become." He laughed softly and brushed his fingers against my cheek. "So now, what you want to go no contact?" Sipped the tea. "I don't know. Maybe I need time to figure it out." He didn't push. He never did. Instead, he leaned back, pulled me into his arms and said, the thing that anchored me more than anything else: "You are never just a waitress. Claire, you're my wife, you're my calm, you're everything." I didn't know I needed until that night at the diner. I closed my eyes. That night, the night it all began 2 years ago. The rain had been coming down in sheets. My shift was about to end, but a tall man in a damp coat slid into the corner booth. 5 minutes before closing, he looked tired. Not the usual kind of tired, though, the kind that sat in his bones. I approached with a coffee pot. "You okay, sir?" No answer. Just a blank stare at the window, his breath shallow. "Hey," I said, lowering my voice. "You're having a panic attack, aren't you?" His fingers twitched, his jaw clenched. He gave a tiny nod. I sat across from him, gently placing the mug down. "Breathe with me." We sat there for 22 minutes. I didn't ask for money, didn't ask for a name, just helped him breathe until his hand stopped shaking. He left a $500 tip with a note. "Thank you for seeing me." I didn't realize who he was until 2 weeks later when I saw his face on a magazine cover. By then, he had already returned to the diner just to see me again. And now he was my husband. And I was still that same girl who had nothing to prove, except to myself 3 days past. 3 days of silence from my family. Then the storm began. It started with a voicemail from my mother. Her tone was clipped overly polite, like she was trying on kindness for the first time in years and didn't know if it fit. "Claire, darling, I just want to talk." We were all a little shocked, that's all. I think it would be nice if we could catch up. "Maybe dinner, bring your husband." I didn't reply. Then Neil sent a long-winded text, no apology. Just a wall of words explaining how the reunion had taken a weird turn and how he hoped there were no hard feelings. Right. He'd called me comic relief. I ignored that too, but the message that finally got to me wasn't one I expected. It came from Grandpa handwritten, delivered by Cora Claire. If I were 20 years younger, I'd have picked up the phone and given your brother a piece of my mind. But these days, my heart doesn't let me yell the way I used to. What happened at the reunion, I was ashamed. Not of you, never of you, of them. You've built something they could never understand, because you built it from grace, from dignity, from nothing but your own strength. I'd love to see you. No pressure, just lunch with your old grandpa. P.S. I always suspected your husband was someone important. The way he looked at you that gave it away. I read the letter 5 times. Then I cried. Ethan came home from a meeting that afternoon and found me sitting at the kitchen counter with Grandpa's letter pressed to my chest. He didn't ask what was wrong, just walked over and pulled me into a hug. I think I'm ready to see him, I whispered. We met Grandpa at his favourite little cafe, the kind that still served sandwiches on wax paper and used mismatched mugs for coffee. He sat in the corner booth exactly where he always did, his cane propped beside him, and his white hair combed back like he was expecting royalty. When he saw me, his eyes crinkled. "My girl," he said, opening his arms. I didn't hesitate. We hugged longer than necessary, but it wasn't enough to undo years. It was just enough to start. Ethan joined us, polite and quiet, letting Grandpa talk. We spoke about everything except the reunion. Grandpa asked Ethan about his work, about the places we'd travelled about the night we met. He laughed at the story like he'd never heard it before, even though I was sure he'd replayed it in his head 100 times. But eventually, the subject circled back. Claire Grandpa said gently, "Your mother wants to talk to you." I stiffened. Ethan's hand slid under the table and squeezed mine. "She says she made a mistake." Grandpa added, "Says she regrets things. She didn't say the word. Sorry, but I think she wants to." "Does she regret what she said or that she said it out loud?" I asked. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I sighed. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just tired of proving myself." He nodded solemnly. "Then don't." Later that night, back at home, I found a message from my mum in my inbox. It was different this time. Claire. I saw the interview. I saw how proud he is of you. How proud I should have been. I didn't know how to raise a daughter who didn't follow the path I expected. But I was wrong to judge you. I don't deserve your forgiveness right away, but I hope you let me earn it. Can we start over it, hit harder than I wanted to admit? Because all I ever wanted was this, a moment of ownership, not a performance, not a facade. Ethan sat beside me and read the message over my shoulder. "What do you think he asked?" I stared at the screen. "I think I want to meet her. Just me and her, no fancy dresses, no money talk, just mother and daughter." "Are you sure?" he asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I want to try." The next day, I met my mother at the city, garden near the Riverwalk. She stood there awkwardly by the fountain, clutching her purse like it was a shield. Her heels sank slightly into the grass. She looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown in ways she never thought possible. When she saw me, she didn't smile immediately. Her eyes welled. "I don't know where to start." She said, "Don't start with excuses." I said gently. She nodded, "I won't. Just thank you for meeting me." We sat on a bench. The wind was gentle. The world kept moving around us, cars, passing kids, laughing birds, chirping, and yet the two of us were still suspended in something fragile. "I missed you," she finally said. "I missed who I thought you used to be," I replied, "but I'm willing to get to know who you are now if you let me be who I am." She looked away, blinking fast. "Can I ask about him?" she asked. "Your husband?" I smiled. "He's kind. He listens. He never once made me feel like I had to be someone else." "I envy you," she whispered. I didn't answer that. I just watched the fountain splash, because for the first time I didn't feel like the girl who didn't belong. I felt like someone finally building something that couldn't be taken away. A week later, I stood behind the diner counter again. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. The place that once smelled like fryer oil and spilled coffee now smelled like home. "Claire," a voice called out. I turned. It was Neil in jeans, alone. No fancy fiancé in sight, just him holding a bouquet of supermarket flowers and looking more unsure than I'd ever seen him. I didn't speak first, I came to say. "Sorry," he muttered, "for what I said, for how I treated you." I raised an eyebrow. "Why now?" He hesitated. "Because you didn't change and you still turned out better than all of us." I looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "Thanks. We weren't healed, but it was a start." Outside, Ethan was waiting in the car. "Ready?" he asked. "Not yet," I smiled. "One more minute." I turned and looked back at the diner. My beginning, my anchor. And then I looked at Ethan. My now, my forever. They could whisper, they could doubt, but they'd never define me again. I had built my life from the ground up. And the best part, I stayed kind. I stayed real. And I stayed me.